time with our panelists, but I did want to say that we have an incredibly diverse membership here at GSER. A fantastic range of foundations, community foundations, donors that join us, and we believe that there's a lot of learning from presenting diverse perspectives. So some of you know that I just came back from maternity leave last week, and I was mostly checked out, but I did hear from some of you and some of you who are not here about our upcoming policy plenary. So I will put it out there that this is not, we weren't trying to cover left-right debate or the waterfront. We brought two deep thinkers on the question of how the elections might influence immigration policy, two people who have thought a lot about the power of Latino political power to influence policy. I already heard jokes about, what was NCLR representing the left? It's the LIBRE initiative. You know, didn't they give out turkeys to get Latino votes? I've heard all kinds of weird things, but I want to assure you that we've invited this panel so that we can learn from them. And what will make this plenary a success is your engagement. So again, I repeat that we're in a safe space. Ask any questions. You are not the toughest crowd these folks have ever seen. So please feel free to raise any questions you have on your mind, but let's of course be respectful. And most importantly, this is a nonpartisan, strictly nonpartisan event and panel. We want you to be vigilant about that. It is tempting. The news last night with Ted Cruz, this particular election lends itself to juicy conversation that you want to move into that realm. This really needs to remain nonpartisan. And last thing I wanted to do was introduce our fantastic, we are so honored to have moderator, Evan Smith, whose bio is in your materials, but I'll just share he's the editor-in-chief and CEO and the founder of the Texas Tribune, which, if you are not familiar, is an incredibly valuable journalistic resource and center of policy thinking. It is a nonprofit, nonpartisan digital organization, recently called one of the nonprofit news sector's runaway success stories. And in case you missed it, he recently interviewed President Obama at South by Southwest. We're glad to have him with us today, and please welcome Evan Smith, and he'll introduce the rest.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So happy to be with you. Welcome to Austin if you're not from here. I appreciated the wrapper that Maya just put on this conversation, that it is going to be a nonpartisan conversation. I'm going to break through that wrapper. We're going to push our distinguished panelists, who themselves are leaders of nonpartisan organizations, to be as candid as they can be in talking about this portfolio of issues. You know how we in the press tell you every 4 years, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. This is the biggest choice election of our lifetimes. We always lie to you every 4 years because those elections tend to be boring. Not this time. This time we're telling you the truth. And so the issues in this election specifically are terrific topics for our discussion today. And we'll go deep. And we'll invite you at about 40 minutes into the hour to go deep along with us by asking great questions. Janet Murguía is the president and CEO of the National Council of La Raza. Daniel Garza is the executive director of the LIBRE initiative. Janet is based in Washington, D.C. We appreciate so much her time and effort in being here. Daniel lives down in the Rio Grande Valley and is from Mission. They both are at the center of these conversations in the context of their positions at their respective organizations. And we are absolutely fortunate to have two truly deep thinkers and sophisticated thinkers on this array of subjects. Please join me in welcoming them here. Their full bios are in your programs, and as I understand it, available to you via the mobile app. And so please learn more about them as you look at their full bios. But I want to jump right into our conversation. Janet, this event was scheduled long ago. It was not known that this morning we would be here a scant 12 hours after what is the effective end of the Republican presidential nomination. So you are now contemplating the next 6 months of conversation, and for all we know, 4 years of Donald Trump as president, the prospect of Donald Trump as president. You are nonpartisan. You are limited by that in what you can say. Maya has given you a way out if you choose not to talk specifically. I want you to find a way in. to give us what you, we're going to go to both sides, but let's start there from the perspective of this campaign. What do you think the implications of last night are for the conversation on these issues?
Yeah, no problem. I'm in. I'm all in
Go,
here.
go,
So,
You're my kind of person. That's it.
look, as a nonpartisan 501c3 organization, we understand that we cannot tell people who to vote for.
Right.
That's very clear. But as a civil rights and advocacy organization, we have a responsibility to call out bigotry and racism and discrimination. I mean, these are issues at the heart of our mission.
Right.
And I really appreciate the opportunity to put the frame on this as we see the stakes so high to understand that there is absolutely room and a need for all of us in the nonprofit world to engage within that clear frame. And so, we are looking and have looked historically at the need for the Latino community in particular to be engaged civically and to create a culture of civic engagement for the Latino community.
Right.
And since 2008, NCLR has been very much at the forefront of civic engagement activities, including naturalization efforts, voter registration efforts, voter education efforts, and voter mobilization efforts.
Do you believe those efforts naturally bear fruit in a cycle like this one? The assumption is that the issues, Janet, in play are going to be a motivator for civic participation this time.
There's no question that that's already happening, but it's also incumbent on all of us to, I think, make sure that those who are in positions to invest in these types of opportunities know how important it is. There will be a set and a cohort and a large segment of the community that will be motivated by what they're hearing and be willing to channel that on their own into action, and we're seeing it happen already. For one, at the National Council of Raza, I'm very proud that we've been part of an effort since 2008 to register 500,000 new Latino voters. But what we're seeing now is that already we're set to reach at least 1 million more applications for citizenship and naturalization, a 25% uptick in naturalization.
Right.
And so, but we're also starting to see voter registration spikes.
Right.
And this is a combination of both a sustained effort by different organizations to engage the community, but also the community realizing that while we are positioned to make a big difference in this election, we still have not come close to realizing our potential.
This election is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the
That's
conversation.
absolutely
Would you agree? Obviously, nonpartisan organization. Janet is an old Clinton Gore hand.
Former,
old, right? Former.
Old Clinton
Small O.
Whatever.
Small O.
How dare you, sir?
You're an old. I mean, it's like 5 minutes in, I'm already in trouble. You're an old Bush hand, right? You were an old President W. Bush hand, right? Your organization is not any more conservative in its orientation as a nonprofit or a nonpartisan, as Janet says, liberal. But you understand from your side of this, there's a piece of what she's talking about that's applicable, right?
Of course.
More engagement, more participation.
Without a doubt, and actually I applaud Janet's efforts and what National Council of Raza is doing to engage Latinos across the country, and of course at the same time also make sure that we as Latinos are also fulfilling our civic responsibility of exercising our vote and, in the democratic process and in our electoral system and helping to choose our leaders. Let me also say entre parentheses, Betty, the reason we give out turkeys is because people can't afford them during Thanksgiving. And I know you didn't mean anything by that, but we care about our community. We love our community.
Yeah.
And the policy impact of what the elected leadership is doing falls down on our community. in a very real and direct way.
Right.
And so we want to make sure that voices on both sides of the Latino community are being heard and that their views are being represented. So we are very much a libertarian conservative organization that cares very much about preserving and defending the free market system in America.
You don't mind associating yourself with those? Where
Without a doubt.
I'm reluctant to characterize either organization in those terms, but you'll go there.
Of course. You know, that our slogan is limited government, unlimited opportunities.
Right.
We very much are passionate about free market.
So I asked Janet about Trump, and she gave a very thoughtful and sophisticated answer that did not contain the word Trump. Will you give an answer that has the word Trump in it? What's your view? What is your view of these next 6 months and, prospectively, the next 4 years?
Yeah, well, let me say this.
Well, I'm sorry, let me go Daniel.
Sorry. I thought you were asking me.
I'll give you a mulligan on your first answer in a second, but let me ask it. So you have a Trump point of view specifically, since it appears that's where we are?
But let me preface it quickly by saying that I have tremendous respect for Janet. I was about to go into how we very much compliment the work that National Council of Raza has done. And I'm very deferential to her. During my time at the White House, she was a pleasure to work with, and she was one of those folks that you can talk to in a respectful, civil way to be very productive in how we legislate and how we advance law and also execute on policy. So I very much appreciate that. I have no reservations about saying that publicly, that I respect the heck out of this woman.
Trump.
So on Trump, look, on the one hand, there's excitement because he's fresh blood. I think people are highly motivated because, of course, he's not part of the system. On the other hand, there's concern. There's real concern. A lot of for us, the express policy positions that he's taken, especially on the issue of immigration, te cuaja la sangre. It curdles the blood because we feel that it is counterproductive to our society to intercept remittances from hardworking people who are sending money back to their grandmothers and mothers. It's also cruel that you're going to expend the resources, the treasure of the United States, to try to deport 11 million people. Would take a massive amount of resources from our economy and effort, and it would create a massive police state. That is non-productive to our society, and to I think, interfere with the very rational practice of one selling their labor and somebody buying their labor to make a profit. Yeah. We should allow for that. Public policy should allow for people to thrive and our economy to thrive. These two policies do not allow for that.
And that is a public position of the LIBRE initiative.
That is a very public position.
You wrote a letter, in fact, last September that got a lot of notice nationally. You did not mention any candidate by name, but you said that as an organization, we are specifically against at least 2 policies that are being discussed.
Well, we wrote it immediately after Donald Trump stated his position.
Right. So although you didn't mention his name.
You do the math.
Right. You talked specifically about ending birthright citizenship, and you talked about mass deportations.
Correct.
LIBRE initiative, libertarian conservative, on the record opposing mass deportations and opposing ending birthright citizenship.
Absolutely.
Are you opposed to the wall?
We are for security of our borders, of course.
Right.
We already have a wall. Look, let's be honest here. There is a 10-mile stretch from Las Peñitas to La Jolla, where I live, right in the middle of Mission and McAllen.
Right.
You know how many people get through that wall that is 25 feet high? 1,000 people a day get through that 10-mile stretch. That's a wall. So the false illusion that a wall is going to keep people out, let's stop.
So you're opposed to the wall?
I'm not opposed to a wall. If it's going to be effective to keep people that we don't want coming in, cartels, pandilleros.
But are you sympathetic to the argument that you build a 25-foot wall and then the richest man in the community is the guy who sells 26-foot ladders?
I am sympathetic to that. Look, we want something that's going to work, that is going to be safe.
Right.
At the same time, what I don't want is this.
Yeah.
I don't want all the focus to go on a wall and we steer away from expanding visa opportunities so that we can accommodate to our, the market forces. Right. Or that we address the issue of dreamers, or that we address the issue of the 11 million. I don't want this thing to hold up everything else.
Let's look for common ground here. La Raza is opposed to mass deportations.
That's correct.
Right. Are you opposed to ending birthright citizenship?
Yes.
Are you opposed to the wall?
Yes.
Look at that. I mean, there's. we should just get off the stage now while we can, because it's going to get more unpleasant, I assure you, not less. Where are you on the Dreamers?
Well, first, I have to make sure, I acknowledge Dan's been so gracious and kind in acknowledging my role when we worked together. When he was a great partner when he worked in the Bush White House. And, you'll hear it here too, but we don't agree on everything at all. But we do have common ground that we know we have to find and that we do share, especially in this area of immigration and immigration reform. And so I do commend Dan for his leadership. And I have to tell you, at our conference, I think it was last year, we were chastised and, really judged by a lot of people for hosting Dan at our conference. Because how dare we, as a nonprofit that has fought hard for immigration reform in a nonpartisan way and in a bipartisan way, how dare we, somehow engage Dan and LIBRE and in the minds of some people, not only look like we agree with them, but give them credibility. And I just have to tell you, I hope that as we look forward to how we're going to create still solutions, and we need solutions badly. And I know we're polarized right now in many ways as a country and as the parties are still figuring out their roles. But I firmly believe, and I think maybe it's because he worked in a Republican White House and I worked in a Democratic White House, that at the end of the day, we still need to find that common ground. And we may not agree 100%, but if we're not trying to engage each other around those types of ideas, we're never going to solve those problems. And so I just really appreciate Garza and all of you all for allowing this kind of dialogue and no judgment in terms of, hey, we have to be able to find ways, even though we can protect our mission and the values behind that mission. He has to protect his mission and the values behind his mission, but we have got to be able to figure out how we can still talk to each other and understand that we're going to have to figure out solutions.
Well, you found 3 areas of common ground. Let me ask you about the Dreamers,
yes,
which Daniel brought up. Your view of the Dream Act and of the Dreamers is?
We support the Dream Act. We support the Dreamers. We commend the Dreamers for their leadership and for bringing a new sense of energy and elevating this issue from a very personal and in a courageous way. And so for us, this is very consistent. And while some people may not know it, and I'm not trying to take credit for this, but I hope people understand that even in the earliest stages of crafting a Dream Act, it was NCLR working with the National Immigration Law Center and Marilena Incapie trying to figure out what would a Dream Act look like. Those roots are part of NCLR and its mission. So we commend the Dreamers for taking this issue and really giving it the visibility and the momentum. And we believe that these young people are the future, not just of our community, but of this country. And we need to invest in them and protect them.
Anything you're hearing, Daniel, that you disagree with?
Absolutely nothing that I've heard I don't disagree with. How does that came out wrong? I totally agree with what you said.
Yes.
Let me make it simple. We love the Dreamer kids. We want them to thrive. We want them to have thriving families and to contribute directly to our economy, have thriving families and societies without a doubt.
Well, let me flip this around then, because we've sort of alluded to the Republican side. We don't have a resolution in the Democratic race. Who would have believed 6 or 8 or 10 months ago that the Republican race would effectively be decided before the Democratic race is decided? Some believe the Democratic race is decided, but last night we got a little bit of a course correction, at least in terms of our perception of where things are. We think we know where this is headed. What is your issue with Hillary Clinton or with the Democrats as far as their policies on these issues? Where is their area of agreement or disagreement?
I have a concern of equal measure on the Democrat side when it comes to immigration reform.
Please.
I want to be optimistic. I want to be hopeful about achieving permanent, sensible, long-term bipartisan immigration reform. When I look at now the nominee on the Republican side, I see somebody who has taken a very harsh position, a position I will not defend, one that I will not support. And I feel that.
So you're you're never Trump?
No, I'm not a never
Trump?
Trump in the political sense. What I'm saying is, on that position, there is no way in hell I'm going to defend it or support it.
It sounds like you've walked up to the edge, not violating your nonpartisan status, of saying I'm not going to vote for this guy.
You do the math.
Can you vote? You going to vote for this guy?
So I can't say because I'm nonpartisan, but on the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
My concern is that Hillary's position is not acceptable to the majorities in Congress and the majorities in the Senate. So she can make all the promises in the world.
Right.
But if here's the thing, Democrats do not get to decide what immigration reform is, and neither do Republicans. They both do. They have to come together. Janet was talking about reaching consensus. She's going to have to take a much more pragmatic position.
You're talking about
Hillary.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. Yes.
You mean Secretary Clinton is going to have to take a more
Secretary
pragmatic...
Clinton is going to have to take a more pragmatic position and give from that position so she can reconcile the differences between the two parties so they can reach an agreement and get consensus so they can have bipartisan reform.
But now, of course she has to start someplace, and she's going to start with what she believes. They're going to start with what they believe,
Barack
and then
Obama
consensus
started someplace and never moved from that someplace. That was the problem.
There are
now,
some on the left who believe, Daniel, he didn't start far enough to the left.
That's true, but see, the attack on us, the LIBRE initiative, is that you guys say that you're for citizenship, but then on the other side, you know, when you're in front of non-Latino audiences, you're say for a work visa program. Let me make very clear our position. The optimum, ideal for us is a path to citizenship. If it was the Ronald Reagan amnesty bill, we would support it. That is our position. But we're not going to get that. Yeah. There are political limitations to achieving the optimum. So what is the next best thing that we would find acceptable? Right. And we would find acceptable in a very pragmatic way a work visa program that allowed for job mobility, circularity, family unification, and that one is not disadvantaged from getting in line. Okay, maybe it's in back of the line, but at least they can get in the line.
Right, so not a path to citizenship.
Not disadvantaged from getting in line for a path to citizenship. But not a path to citizenship would be a work visa that would give legality to the 11 million that are here.
Legal status, but not path to citizenship.
Exactly. But again, our ideal position is one, what we would find acceptable is another. So that's the framework that we would operate in.
Janet, Daniel makes a very good point that if you're pragmatic, if you're realistic about what's likely to happen over the next 4 years, if you have a Democrat in the White House, you may very well have one or both houses of Congress controlled by Republicans. May. I mean, there's the apocalyptic view of Trump as nominee, which is for some on the right that the Democrats take back both, but that's a very long walk to get there. So assume you have at least one House of Congress controlled by Republicans. What is the most you can expect or hope for in that case in terms of the issues Daniel's talking about?
Well, I mean, I think one of the scenarios that Daniel talked about was the 2013 Senate passed bill. I mean, it had a lot of the things that Daniel was talking about. Right. And yet, it achieved bipartisan support in the Senate, but ran into a brick wall in the House. And that brick wall of intransigence is something that I believe has got, we need to have a strategy for dealing with that. And I think that for us, it became very evident that the president would now be able to then exercise, based on legal precedent, his executive authority to move forward. Right. I spoke earlier about the need to get a permanent solution and why we have to keep working at engaging around what would be involved in that permanent solution. But when you keep seeing this type of intransigence while people are suffering and living in the shadows in a manner contrary to our very American values, well, you have to exercise all the levers that you have in front of you. And that executive authority is something that we believe can be used and will be used ultimately.
So do you believe what the intransigence you're referring to in the House was at a time when John Boehner was Speaker?
That's correct.
And the composition of the House was what it was then?
Right.
Does Paul Ryan as Speaker, the prospect of Paul Ryan as Speaker, give you more hope or less hope that a House is likely to go along with a bill similar to what you described from Senate in 2013?
You know, I don't know right now. I mean, I know where Paul Ryan has been on this issue, and I remember, as someone who hails from the great state of Kansas, when Paul Ryan worked for then Congressman and Senator Sam Brownback, who was much more moderate on the immigration issue and worked on a lot of the provisions that were part of a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I know Paul Ryan understands fundamentally what comprehensive immigration reform could look like and why it would be positive, not just in terms of immigration reform, but for the economy. I don't know how the makeup of the House going forward into the future and what the effect of these elections will do for him and his perspective. I want to keep the door open that perhaps there would be a potential for a compromise. But having said that, we have to be prepared to move forward with this executive action, knowing that the cards that were dealt with in that election may not change at all.
Daniel, John Boehner got lit up by like a Christmas tree by the conservatives in the House not passing immigration reform. What do you think Paul Ryan's going to do if he passes immigration? Will they run him out of town with pitchforks and torches if he does that?
I find the prospect of Paul Ryan very hopeful when it comes to immigration reform.
You do? You think more hopeful?
He's a breath of fresh air. I think he's a vast change on the sentiments or the attitudes when it comes to immigration reform. He's called me directly, and we've had these discussions. So I'm very hopeful about that. But look, in 2007, when President George W. Bush was ready to sign a bill, Pelosi controlled the House, and it went up against a wall because Rahm Emanuel wanted to protect his freshman congressmen who, by the way, were being threatened by the unions that they were going to withhold contributions to them if they voted for immigration reform.
Yeah, but it was Daniel, it was really Republicans to the right of George Bush who killed immigration reform, not Pelosi House members.
That's
right?
But the majority was the Democrats, is what I'm trying to say. But here's the deal. We run into a problem by accepting at face value that all Democrats in the Democrat Party are friendly to immigration reform, when in fact, there's a lot of evidence to show that many of them have been adverse to it. So let me give you some examples about that. It was Senator Hillary Clinton who said, I am adamantly against illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants. Look at them. They stand there on that street waiting to get jobs. We shouldn't give them those jobs. She said that. That's her prior statement. Now, there were also 5 incumbent senators who went to Senator Barack Obama, or to President Barack Obama, and said, please do not pass executive action because it's going to endanger our re-election efforts. So he did. He waited on it, held it, and in his second term, after the midterm, then passed executive action because then it didn't act against the political interest of Democrats. One more example. It was Lunger and Grimes and Mary Landrieu,
in Kentucky and Mary Landrieu in Louisiana.
In Louisiana, who attacked Republican senators or Republican candidates for their support of immigration reform, support of amnesty. So when Democrats' backs are up against a wall and it's not in their political interest to be for immigration reform, they turn like that.
Look, I want to be clear. We do have to hold people on both sides of the aisle accountable. There's no question about it. But Daniel, and with all due respect, raising some prior statements that Secretary Hinton has made, and again.
Well, you made prior statements about Ryan.
Yeah, no, let me get to that point. So she's made some prior statements. He's picked a couple of examples in states where conservative Democrats have had challenges. But let me tell you, we don't have to look at prior statements right now. When we look at what Donald Trump has said and the positions that he has taken.
Okay, you're going there.
We're talking. Well, I'm talking about policy positions that he has taken, and we're not trying to guess. What does he mean by mass deportation? What does he mean by birthright citizenship? It is right there, present and counter to not only every interest that we have as a community in wanting to protect our families, but as a country in wanting to do that.
I agree on that, 100%.
But I think it's important to note that, and when the last Republican presidential candidate ran, their big position on immigration was self-deportation. So
Right.
the community is not responding to kind of, how do I break out that code of what that candidate said?
It was clear.
Those were clear
Right.
candidate and party
Right.
messages being sent to the whole country,
Yeah.
and in particular with a bullseye on the back of our Latino community and voters.
Now, Daniel, Janet said, and this may be an area where you do, in fact, I know it's an area where you disagree. Janet said that in the absence of action in Congress, she believes that executive action on deportation, what the courts ultimately say about this notwithstanding, that it's legal, it's appropriate, there's a precedent for it, and that in the absence of congressional action, that's appropriate. You take a different position, not necessarily the substance, but the process at least.
Process. This is a real difficult position. One, because Marco Rubio was set to introduce legislation that was going to be permanent law for the Dreamers.
Right.
And Barack Obama got in front of him, again, maybe I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, because there was an urgency as opposed to self-political interest. There was an urgency he felt because his time was running out and he wanted to take some action to take care of the kids. And he acted. And then when political pressure also built on that, then he acted when he said he couldn't, because he's not a monarch and he didn't have the authority to do so, acted to then advance another executive order, which was DAPA, to protect the parents of those children. I don't have any qualms with the president's intent on this. It was humanitarian. It was because of limited resources that he raised the specter of prosecutorial discretion.
Right.
And it was because there was political pressure. All legitimate, in my eyes, to advance executive action when Congress or when current law is hazy on some issues. The problem that we have is that current law is not hazy on this issue. It does not allow for someone who is not an adult to petition for their parents. It actually flies in the face of current law and current congressional intent to provide. It's not like it's saying we're making a choice not to prosecute, not to deport. What it's saying is we're going to ignore the folks that are violating the law, which is fine because I've stated that. But we're also now going to extend to them visas, services that flies in the face of congressional intent. And if we set that precedent, then a President Donald Trump would take that precedent and run with it on everything else when it comes to the president imposing law, legislating where he's really supposed to be executing the intent of Congress. That's the problem that we have with it, not because of what it does to the community.
Your problem with this president's executive order is that it holds the door open for future abuses of that authority.
And it's a direct abuse because it flies in the face of current law. It's not in consonance with current law. Executive action is only supposed to apply when a part of current law is hazy and you want to fix it in execution of that law. Here, he is not only not fulfilling his take care clause of the Constitution, but he is actually granting visas. Maybe even, apparently they're talking about child tax credit in taxes and Obamacare. You're conferring visas. You're giving benefits instead of just using prosecutorial.
Well, let me ask Janet. Are you alarmed by the prospect, if this executive action is allowed to go forward, the prospect of giving that power unrestrained to the next president if the next president is not the person you want to see elected?
Look, I think the president has said that he has this authority. We know that legally there is precedent for this type of authority and action. And I think as long as we're consistent and within the law, which is the case that was made before the Supreme Court, then I think we have to be able to know that we're going to be able to move forward within that law.
And even if Donald Trump is president and can, with executive action, do a whole bunch of things you don't agree with, you're good with that?
I'm good with making sure that whatever the president does is within that legal authority.
Whichever the president.
Whatever president
We're
that
talking
is.
about. Why do we always talk about immigration reform as comprehensive? This is a conversation that we hear a lot in Texas. Conservative Republican lawmakers in Texas say, we believe that there needs to be some form of immigration reform, but we don't believe that everything has to be done all in one bucket. We think there should be a piecemeal solution beginning with secure the border. If you secure the border, then we can move on to other aspects of this. What's wrong with that, Janet?
Because you cannot find one person to give you a clear definition of what securing the border means. I'm telling you that they have moved that goalpost every time.
Right.
And there's no one who will define it clearly.
Yeah.
And when you try to get a consensus around it, they keep moving it further to the right.
Daniel, do you have a definition of what secure the border means?
Yeah, I was sitting in a room with Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator John McCain when they were about to introduce the Senate bill.
Right.
And with some other folks. There was about 6 of us. And they were explaining this interception rate that they were going to get to before it triggered all the other pieces of,
Right.
of immigration reform. And they said it was going to get to a 90% interception rate. And I asked the dumb question, the fundamental question, what's the current interception rate? Son, I don't know.
Right.
There's
Well,
no
the
idea. And who
yeah.
does quantify what 90%
Well,
is?
the president seems to know. The president says that the net migration number in this at this moment is down to 0, and the president would say, and I think statistics at least would back up his perspective
That's
on this,
right. It's not
that
just the
in this
president.
administration that the number of deportations has been greater than that in the administration you worked in, the Bush administration. So that causes some here and elsewhere to question whether the border security problem is exactly what it has been described to be. If net migrations are 0 or near that, and if deportations are greater in the last 7 years than they were in the preceding 8, tell me what the problem is we're trying to solve.
Well, look, no, we want to solve it. 70% of Latinos are for enhanced border security.
Right.
You want to have
But I guess tell me what border security
and
looks
safety.
like at a time when net migrations are 0 and deportations are up. What does it look like going forward that we have to accomplish?
Well, look, I think you want full control as a sovereign nation as to who comes into your nation and who leaves, and what are their intents and purposes when they come into
Right.
our nation as visitors,
Yeah.
as visas, or whatever the case is. And I think the citizenry wants to feel a sense of security, that there is no loss of order. When right before the Republican-led House was about to introduce legislation for permanent immigration reform in response to the Senate bill, we had the surge at the border. Right there in Ansaldua's Bridge, 5 miles from where I live, maybe even lesser. The way the media was describing it, you'd think it was Z zombies or something, like they were like coming over the wall or something.
Right.
I think what happens is what it created was this sense that we've lost control. We've
Yep.
lost order.
Yep.
There is no sense of order, and that's what people want to feel, that there is now order on the border.
Are you concerned that the immigration, migration across the border, maybe said more properly, is not just in the eyes of policymakers, people who are undocumented, but also people who wish to do us actual harm? So you hear a lot in Texas about the need for greater border security spending because there's the prospect of ISIS crossing the border.
That's a legitimate fear.
You think it's a legitimate
It's a
conversation?
legitimate fear, a legitimate concern, and I think elected leadership would be wise to I think, listen to the Americans' concerns and angst about that. But at the same time, we have to have a border that breathes, that is flexible. Look, animals don't know what borders are. There needs to be migration. I learned that when I was at the Department of Interior, that there are some places where you need to put car barriers, where the migration of animals continues unimpeded,
Right.
because that's a natural part
Just a
of
complicated issue.
habitats.
Right.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things to
Right.
consider when you're
Right.
talking about the wall or border security.
Janet, how do we think about this set of issues as it relates to workforce? We saw in some southern states when there was a crackdown on undocumented labor that ag and other industries suffered pretty significantly as a result of the loss of workforce. It may be the case that people want to tighten up who is here legally and do we need to get E-Verify in effect if we can make that work efficiently to make certain that everybody's status is what we want it to be. But at the same time, there are entire industries in the state of Texas and elsewhere that are relying very heavily on undocumented workforce. What do we do about that?
Look, this does not require rocket science. We have so many proposals on the table that were part of the Senate-passed bipartisan bill that really take a common sense approach to how we should deal with the workforce needs in this country and how we renew and reform the visa system. And one of the things that we learned is that there has to be some elasticity when it comes to the workforce needs in this country.
Yep.
And we've got to find some common sense rules that guide it.
Yep.
It is not, it's not impossible. It's certainly not difficult. We could figure this out. I think for me, what's become very clear is that there's no real will on the part of all the players here, and certainly what we've seen generated in terms of the messages coming from the Republican Party and the House Republican leadership, is that there's been no interest in moving forward on this issue in a credible way. And so when you run up against all these options that offer common sense solutions, and people keep finding more excuses to not engage, then again, that's when you have to realize that you've got to look at other options that are within the law and where we have seen legal precedent, and pursue the executive action.
We're going to go to questions from the audience here shortly. Let me just explore two more topics with you both if I can. So Janet has talked, Daniel, a couple times about engagement in the Latino community in this process. In Texas, we understand, we're hyper aware that the turnout among the voting age population of Latinos in Texas, Latinos soon will be the majority population in Texas, that voting age participation among Latinos is below that of African Americans, significantly below that of Anglos. There are people who push back and say that race is not the issue. Race and ethnicity are not the best predictors of participation, that it's age, education, and socioeconomic status. Would you help me understand what's going on here, why the Latino community is not turning out in the numbers that one would think, motivated by issues, and because the numbers are so great? What is going on in Texas and elsewhere?
My experience has been that there's a very real sentiment in the Latino community that maybe we haven't taken ownership of America, that we don't have that sense of all of us belonging. And so, like in the island, for example, in Puerto Rico, the turnout is over 80%. But then Puerto Ricans in Orlando and in New York, it hovers below 40%. What happened? What's the difference?
And nationally, in the last election, the Latino participation, voting age participation was about 17%, is that right?
I don't know what the exact number was.
It was pretty low.
The what? The voting age?
Voting age participation, as a percentage of the voting age participation.
The other
Well, I
two
know
factors.
we, as a community, represented 10% of the electorate.
Right.
So
and
we are
hopefully
11
we're gonna inch that.
million voters,
Right.
roughly.
There are, I think,
in 2012.
In 2012, the white vote was 71% of all the vote. In 2014, it was 74%. So that means less minorities turned out in the midterm election.
Yeah.
In 2016, it's going to come back down to 70%, the white vote. That means that big chunk of
Right.
That 5% difference is more minorities that are going to come out. That matters. And I say that because non-Latinos, whites, voted 65% for Mitt Romney. Minorities voted 20% for Mitt Romney. I mean, that's a huge difference.
Right.
Now, back to your point about why we don't turn out. We're very young. 27 years median age, while the rest of the country is 37
So
years.
age may be an issue.
Age is an issue, without a doubt, because young kids, maybe distracted, are in colleges, or
Right.
they don't put a priority on public policy for whatever reason. The youth usually don't turn out as high numbers as folks who are older and more serious about their surroundings. Now, the other part too is that almost half of all Latinos live in California and Texas, and those are decided. That's red and that's blue.
Right.
Pretty much. And so there's not a lot of engagement. In fact, I think Latino Decisions put out this poll that only 25% of Latinos had been reached out to in Texas by a partisan organization or a party. So there's very little engagement, and there's no candidates coming into town and stoking
Right.
things up or whatever.
Right.
It's very dotted, and so that does make a difference.
Janet, from your perspective, what's it going to take to raise the percentage of voting age participation in the Latino community?
Yeah, I want to review some of those statistics because I think it is important for us to know kind of where we are. But, the fact is that 11 million of us voted in 2012, and I think the expectation is that there'll be at least 13 million will vote this year of Latino voters. And yet we still have 9.6 million of us who are citizens but not registered to vote according to the
Eligible
census.
but not registered.
Yes, and at least 4 million who are not yet citizens. So when you look at the potential to grow the
Right.
participation of the Latino electorate, it is very high.
Right.
And,
But it's a long walk from
that doesn't-
potential to execution,
But that
though,
doesn't,
right?
and that doesn't even account for the fact that nearly 1 million Latinos will turn 18 each year and every year for at least the next decade and a half.
Right.
So we've got a real opportunity,
Right.
and there's a real deficit right now. And I would just say that there's a number of different reasons. Some of them are voter suppression issues that are real. We're seeing voter restrictions erupting everywhere in every state, and county, and to try to restrict participation and information. But I think ultimately to get to this bigger issue of the need to focus on naturalization and efforts that will really allow us to make sure that we are letting people understand in our community why it's so important for them to take that step to become naturalized citizens and the importance of that. But yet, we know that those folks, it's not just because they're not interested. One, it's a resource question. You know, there's real resources. And, there have to be more investments with what I would just say is a need for immigrant integration.
Yeah.
So that folks can really understand that as they integrate fully into society,
Right.
this is a natural part of that immigrant integration. But if there's not more investments on again, encouraging people to be citizens,
Right.
and looking at the English language acquisition for those folks to be able to be full participants, not just for the citizenship test, but for real work skills
Right.
that need to be developed in context with that, that's where we really need to see those investments. And of course, much more investments in terms of resources, investing in growing this Latino pool of voters. This is a real opportunity for both parties, I would argue,
Right.
to understand that this group of voters is really one that is there for the investments to be made in, and they will be loyal participants in that election. They're discerning people, but when given that opportunity, they will do this. And I just really need to give a shout out here to someone who's been historically such an important player for us in this role of bringing attention to investments around immigrant integration and around naturalization. Jerry Mannion at Carnegie has really, in my mind, distinguished herself among all others. And I really appreciate the role that not only she's taken in working with other foundations, but really here with this organization. Right. And the fact that this type of organization, the GSER group, has been created to focus on broadly on all these issues is really important.
Well, in fact, Daniel, last point, in this room are the very investors Janet refers to. You have institutional philanthropy here, people who are focused on these issues.
Yes.
What is your message for them in terms of how they can engage on either the big portfolio of policy issues or in a more targeted way on getting more people in the Latino community, in the emerging majority population of our state and other states, to pay attention, to engage, to turn out, and to be active citizens?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with Janet's statements on these issues. Look, we are very much involved also across the country. We have thousands of volunteers who are involved in teaching English, to folks, who are first-time immigrants, who are trying to get to the business of assimilating. We're also doing workshops for naturalization services across the country with our volunteers and our staffers, and we also want to get them engaged. The one huge credit I'll give to Janet is their massive effort on registration. That's hard stuff, and it draws a lot of resources. We haven't done that because it takes a lot. We hope to get there at some point, but there's no question that both parties benefit from the opportunities of the Latino electorate. And I'll give you one quick example. Barack Obama in 2008 got 59% of the Latino vote in Colorado. And the other side said it can't get any worse. It got really worse. He got 85% of the Latino vote in 2012. So, sure, you can clap. And then
a few people from Boulder.
Right. Michael Bennett.
And apparently from nonpartisan organizations.
Michael Bennett got 90% of the Latino vote in that same year when he ran for Senate. So here's the thing, though. Cory Gardner, a Republican candidate for Senate in 2014, got 45% of the Latino vote in Colorado. What happened? You had this trend where it was, favoring Democrats. He connected. He engaged. He spent resources. He hired from within, from the community. He went to the Latino restaurants, Latino Chamber of Commerce's, Latino churches. He earned their vote.
Right.
So he had the biggest opportunity because that's where the massive vote, opportunity was. And the same, applied, across the country in other
Well,
races
here,
that I won't
here
get
in
into.
Texas,
but
Greg Abbott got 46% of the Latino vote in the race for governor against Wendy Davis, in part
phenomenal.
because he went into communities where Republicans typically don't go, and he asked. And so if the Latino
And he
population turns out in greater numbers, they're up for grabs, and both parties go after them.
and that could swing elections like that.
And it could swing elections. All right, let's open it up in the balance of time we have for questions. I think we're going to walk a microphone around. I'm inclined to tell you to just use your outside voice, but we'll repeat the question in any case for the benefit of people who can't hear. Sir.
I don't have an outside voice.
All right.
So thank you very much. This has been quite a way to kick off the GSER conference. It's been a great conversation. I just wanted, the first two questions I've got are from Mr. Garza, and then the third part is for both of you. So my question to you is this. Given who your founders are of your organization and the fact that you came online after the horrible election results of 2012 in response to self-deportation, I just want to understand, and it's just a question, how do I know that your organization doesn't represent a political ideology and
Right.
it does the aspirations of Latinos throughout the country?
Right.
The second part was, even though we talked about the wall and security, I want to know, you didn't answer the question, are you guys about security first as the debates kind of go forward? And last, there's a lot of promises being made in the election. Hopefully we don't have to listen to Donald Trump's. But Ms. Clinton, Secretary Clinton, has made some promises. I'm just wondering how both of your organizations are going to hold them accountable.
Okay, so let's start. Grassroots or AstroTurf?
Grassroots. That was easy. Look, I mean, I can tell you.
You understand that when people hear that you're an organization funded in part by the Koch brothers, and you say we're sincerely about this portfolio of issues, there
Well, you
are
gotta be
some
funded by
people
somebody.
who will roll their eyes like Mary Pat Christie behind Donald Trump. There are some people who will roll their eyes back into their head. You understand that, right?
I am confident where I stand that we are an organization about ideas and principles, and that we advance those ideas that are conservative, libertarian in their definition. We believe strongly in the American free market system. We believe in limiting the size and the scope and the role of government in the lives of individuals. We believe that as the power is centralized in Washington, D.C., there is a proportionate diminishment of power to the individual. And that's a danger. That's pernicious to our society. And so we're going to defend against those policies that centralize power and capital in Washington, D.C.
Right.
There is a legitimate fear because of the recklessness in spending as well that is also reducing barriers to opportunity for Latinos.
Yeah.
We want a thriving Latino community, and we believe that by growing the private sector and growing productivity in the private sector is the best way to do that. Now, of course, at the same time, we also want to redistribute knowledge and opportunity. That means we want better schools. We want more jobs, and the only way you're going to get more jobs and a better economy is through productivity in the private sector. Government does not generate opportunities or jobs or wealth. We do, the people, and that's what we're fighting for. Now, we're funded by about 1,500 people, but of course the ones that get all the attention are Mr. Charles and David Koch.
Right.
Fine. I admire Charles and David Koch, and I stand before you today, tell you that I admire what they have achieved. They have created 70,000 high-paying jobs in America and provide services that meet consumer demand. I want more Charles and Davids, not less. And what they are fighting for is to defend that free market system that we align with. So I don't make apologies for associating with Charles and David or for having contributors that have been successful. 86% of millionaires in America made their own money. That's important to understand that. Made their own money through hard work and innovation. Not because of greed, but because they offered products and services that met a demand and made life better for people.
So the question is, how are you going to hold your side accountable? I alluded to this letter that you wrote back in September in the middle of the primary. You are making every effort within the nonpartisan structure of your organization.
Of course.
To hold your
we
people
have been
accountable.
very honest about our look,
You will publicly challenge your nominee if your nominee goes for
Of
the
course,
next 6
we already
months
have.
on mass deportations,
My
on birthright
biggest
citizenship,
fear
all that.
with Donald Trump,
Right.
and he has stated it to Chuck Todd,
Right.
is that he is going to deport the DACA kids. They're gone, he says. They're gone. Chuck, they're gone. We're not a country if we don't enforce
Right.
that puts fear into me. I don't like that. Of course we're going to hold our side accountable, and of course we do. When they are taking positions that make society less free,
You'll speak up.
that take away our rights as
Right.
individuals,
Right.
yes, we'll come after them.
Janet, how do you hold your side accountable? Will you hold your side accountable?
When you say your side, be careful, Evan. This is part, no, I'm serious. This is part of the problem.
Okay, how will
I
you
don't-
hold Donald Trump accountable? How about that? Is that better?
Well, I want to make it clear. We take very seriously our mission at NCLR and the fact that we are a nonpartisan organization. And we want to challenge and have challenged both people on the Republican side of the aisle
Right.
and on the Democratic side of the aisle and called them out.
So you intend to hold
So
both sides accountable?
that-
She
I
did call
have.
Obama reporter-in-chief, which was
I have held both sides accountable.
So then how will you hold both sides accountable going forward? Tell me what you'll do specifically to the questioner's point.
Well, Dan just mentioned, we have so much clarity going into this election cycle. If we care about policies
Right.
that these presidential candidates are promoting, we have so much clarity, especially when you look at on-the-record statements, not previously, not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago, not 2 years ago, but in the last few weeks, days, we have seen Donald Trump double down, triple down
Right.
on deporting dreamers, mass deportations of the 11 million undocumented, and supporting birthright citizenship. There is clarity as
Right.
much as we could imagine. You don't have to have any room for imagination there. So obviously, we are going to do everything we can to make sure our cohort of voters are educated as it relates to what those positions mean. We don't have to do a lot of education
Right.
because I think they're pretty aware. On the Democrat side, and again, no one has put more out there on the line as the head of a nonpartisan Latino organization or any nonprofit to say, I'm going to call folks out on both sides of the aisle. I did not relish it, but when deportations reached over this 2 million mark, more than the previous
More than Bush,
administration,
yes.
and when it was very clear to us that the Republican House leadership was not going to move, that we needed to put a stop to those deportations, to the separation, to the agony that these families were feeling. And I referred to the president as the deporter-in-chief. That is accountability.
Yep.
That is what we're going to do as we move forward. And I've already irritated, annoyed, and had Debbie Wasserman Schultz very upset with me,
Yeah.
who's the head of the DNC, because I've challenged that the DNC has not done the outreach with Latino voters that they need to be doing. They have not put all the resources
Right.
out there that we feel that needs to be out there if they're going to engage on this election. So that is our responsibility, not to be for one person over another, but to follow the merits of the issue and make sure that our community is fully educated, registered to vote, and mobilized on election day, because that is how we're going to see the outcomes that we need.
Tell me an issue on which you disagree with Secretary Clinton, on any of the issues we've talked about today.
Yeah.
I want to take you at your word that you don't have a side. I believe you. Peace.
I don't have a
Okay,
side.
tell me an issue on which you disagree with Secretary Clinton.
Well, I'm trying to think right now, but we follow the merits of the issues. So but Evan, put it in context.
Yeah.
We've never seen a more polarized choice for the direction that this country is going to go in. And I don't apologize for arguing on the merits, the substance of the policies that a particular candidate happens to be aligned with us on. Not us with them, but them with us.
With you. Okay, that's a fair distinction. I'll buy that. Okay. Where is the next question? We have a microphone going around. Maybe this gentleman here? Very well. Sir.
Daniel, you mentioned that your acceptable solution to the path to citizenship would be a good worker visa program. I think that sounds like John Kasich's position, and I'm wondering why he's kind of being ignored. And is there do Republican-leaning Latinos are aware of that position, and is that something that's an opportunity?
there is a majority of Latinos who would settle for a legalization work visa program. Settle means that, of course, we'd rather have this, but we'll take that. And what I find ironic here is that the left celebrates the actions of this administration for providing temporal, partial band-aids that are executive actions that only give legalization, but then denounce and criticize Republicans for wanting to make it permanent, and would put people on a path to citizenship at a certain point, but at least would give them the absolute certainty that they can go to work without being separated from their families at the end of the day and be deported, that they can contribute to the economy and make life better for themselves. Look, at the end of the day, you know, we want something that is going to induce family cohesion, that is going to actually benefit and strengthen our national economy and strengthen our borders. So what can that look like? You know, so what I'm saying is, my concern is, on the one side, you have somebody who's taken a really harsh position, Donald Trump, on immigration issues, but someone who's being a little bit too fantastical about immigration policy and promising stuff that she cannot deliver on, because you're not going to get it passed in the legislature.
Why hasn't Kasich done better in this race if he is carving out a middle path then? If the country is generally a centrist country, why hasn't Kasich been able to get more
that
traction?
answer.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, even a Latino has to ask himself, if I don't agree with a candidate on one issue, am I willing to forsake all the other issues that I agree with them on and turn from that candidate to accept that position that I agree on immigration with the other candidate, but may not agree with him on 50% of the other issues? That's a legitimate question you have to ask yourself. Am I willing to forsake 95% issue alignment for 5% issue alignment with any one candidate? Every voter fundamentally asks themselves, will my life be better if I vote for this person or that person? And sometimes when you take the whole of their agenda, you know, you'd rather go with the other person, even though you agree with them on immigration. That's a valid position.
They're telling us we have to stop. Let me give Janet the last word before we do, please.
Well, thank you. I just, you know, look, again, we're not guessing as to where, you know, the Republican now presumptive candidate, the positions that they're taking, particularly as it relates to our community. There's no guessing. There's real clarity here. And people talk about a pivot and whether he's going to pivot. You know, I don't know that there's a crowbar built to have him pivot strong enough. You know, there's been a lot of damage done in terms of the minds of the Latino community. But what I worry about, and we didn't get to this, but I guess I'll just leave with this, is that regardless of what happens, but assuming even if Trump loses, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know that any one candidate's going to win in a landslide. I would not predict that. What are the effects of Trumpism as we move forward? Whether whoever wins or loses, obviously we've got a lot to focus on depending on who wins because of the polarized choices that's out there. But even if Trump loses, what damage has been done in the sense that we know now that there is a group of followers who somehow embrace some of these messages that are being promoted out there. We have to make sure, and this is my challenge, I'll close with a challenge to you all, because you all, I think in many ways have a unique role, a fundamental role in how we can shape the way this country moves forward into the future. Our mission at NCLR is to open the doors to the American dream for everyone, including the Latino community. Well, out here, I see a lot of gatekeepers to that American dream. And I guess I would just say that the narrative that's being created about Latinos and immigrants as somehow a weight and a negative for the future of our country is something from a communications and media perspective that we ought to pay careful attention to. And while your work may predominantly be focused on just immigration, we all have to have a new frame as we look at what the broader implications of this work mean and how we can change that narrative to correct that narrative for the best interests, not just of immigrants and Latinos in this country, but for the future of this country, because that is at stake. And I will tell you this, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, historians will be writing this chapter about what happened, and it is going to be seen as an incredible time. We're living it right now, but it's going to be seen as an incredible time in our history. What are they going to say about the role of philanthropy and foundations at this very time? How did you define your role? And what did you do to affirmatively sort of create a plan for how to do that? I know what I need to do with my organization. I hope you all have a plan for where you want to stand when it comes to history. That's from there.
That's a great place to end. Please, a big hand for Janet Murguía and Daniel Garza. Thank you very much.
Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thanks. Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Very much enjoyed it. Thank you. Good. Very good.